Welcome to Artist Fit podcast for the day. We are grateful that we have another opportunity to have this conversation. And our today's conversation is actually on the existence of God. You know, we both have a burden to explain how reality is shaped. This we will do today by looking at the both sides, both the theism and atheism. If we must do that, we must do it with respect to each other and only allow facts to be the judgment standard, not the tone, the sound, and or aggression. The reason we are here is to have a sober discussion on God's existence with an aim to help our viewers to appreciate the biblical position that God exists outside of space, time, and matter in relation to the alternative reasoning against the same. And to help us have this discussion today, we have an amazing panel of three brothers and one sister. And so I want to give them an opportunity to introduce themselves and give us their general overview of the topic, the existence of God. We start with the man on the far left.
Thank you, Daktari. I'm very excited to be here. My name is Mark Chege, and I'm a Christian. I work with a ministry called Apologetics Kenya, and we are interested in the confluence between faith and science and reason and all these issues. And I think on this question of God, it becomes very pertinent because it's a question that hinges on reality, because God as a being either exists or does not exist. You cannot have an in-between about him. And so it is very important that one picks a position based on understanding, because these are also questions that have eternal consequences. So I'm very excited to be here and looking forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Thanks so much.
So my name is Linza Edimo. And based on this conversation, actually this is the most crucial conversations that many people get involved in. And what's so much fantastic about this kind of discussions, they open our minds and see, and we also learn to appreciate the supernatural way of life and things that happen. So I'm excited to be here for this discussion.
Thank you so much, Linza.
Yeah, my name is Jared Oginga. I'm a Christian and also a theologian. And for the topic of the day, to me, if I were to frame the topic, it would have been something like, what if God did not exist? Because as a Christian, the default setting is that God exists. And actually, to say that God does not exist, in fact, the topic itself assumes that God exists, because we even have a name for him, God. I mean, how did we come up with it? If that concept or that person does not exist at all. So maybe the next time we have such a similar discussion, the topic should be, what if God did not exist?
Wow.
But even talking about God, we are assuming here that the God we supposedly are trying to see whether they exist or not is the biblical God, because there are several gods. Are we saying they are saying all the gods don't exist, or only one God does not exist?
Thank you so much, Jared. All right.
Thank you very much. My name is Morris Wanjohi, also known as Secular Kenyan. I'm the one on the, is it called what? The opponent?
Yes.
On the receiving end. All bets are against me. I'm playing away. And I'm a minority, but what matters, I think, facts doesn't worry about whether you're a minority or majority. So I look forward to the discussion. I just want to correct that the default setting is not that God exists. The default setting is also not that God does not exist. The default setting is we don't know. Then we can make an argument from there. But yeah, that's it for me. I look forward to the conversation.
Thank you so much, Maurice, and welcome.
Thank you.
Indeed, it looks like every other person here is home ground. So you are from the away. But you know, sometimes teams go to these away matches and they surprisingly
Do better.
do better. So,
Saying
Yeah.
if I do better, it will be a surprise.
no, Jared, you've just mentioned something very interesting that you wish that the topic could be changed. When I was just thinking about this topic, someone challenged me that actually that the topic needs to change.
Oh.
And yeah, the perception here was from the dictionaries, they define exist as come into being. So according to the person, because he was a Christian talking to me, come into being. So he was saying, if we come to have this discussion on an already settled mind, that we are talking about God coming to being,
that would be
is that we as Christians have lost the discussion. Because is it a theological error then that theology discusses existence of God? Why are we discussing the existence of God, and yet we know that He is there?
Yeah, I think maybe, words have two meanings. Words have a popular meaning and also have their technical meaning. So the definition I've just given is the technical meaning. But the popular meaning exists when we say, does God exist? We do not at any time think that did God, or was there a time when God was not available? God has always existed outside of time. So, but in a popular usage, that's why the dictionary meaning that we have gotten from that definition. But when, especially speaking as a Christian, we know when we ask even the question, does God exist? We already, our default setting is God has always existed, even before we knew of the concept of God.
What do you think?
Yeah, and maybe here, just to answer the question on the meaning of existence, maybe as Jared would say, usually in discussions there's what you have as dictionary definitions, then there's what is the philosophical definition, so that the idea of existence understood philosophically would more lean towards being. So whether God is, it's not so much of whether He came to being, because if we are talking about gods that have come to being, then we are not discussing the God of the Bible. Because the God of the Bible does not come to being. He's not created. He has always existed. And as he noted, the default position for the Christian is that God exists. Of course, we want to be kind to differing views, that there are people whose default position is not that God exists. And so perhaps just to lean towards what Morris has said, agnosticism in a philosophical discussion would be the default position, agnosticism. But then again, that is assuming that we are not Christians. But because we are Christians already, we know. And therefore, that's why for us, God exists. That's how I would define it.
Maybe before I bring Linsa, to also weigh in, maybe she will bring a gender-packed conversation on the two perspectives. Now, again, Maurice, it's the same question. Why are you interested as an atheist, why are you interested in the topic existence of God? Yet, in your mind, it doesn't
Does
exist.
not exist.
Does it?
Yeah, it does a lot, especially in Kenya.
Okay.
So for him, he's saying the default position is for a Christian would be God exists. Two things we need to define there, as you've tried to do. Define existence. He's during his introduction, he said God exists outside of time and space. That's a contradiction, because the very definition of existence is something that occupies space at a particular time. But that's splitting hairs. The other thing, the most important thing we need to define is how do you know, the process of knowing, to differentiate between belief and knowing. So how do you know? How do you arrive at the process of knowing? So that you say, I know you exist, I know this thing does not exist. Once you define that, then now you can make the argument whether God actually, exists, or you believe exists, or you think He does not exist.
No.
But now, to answer your question, Why does this question matter? From where I sit, the argument that God exists is a false claim, but it's not the only false thing that people believe. There are many things that people believe that are not true. Like there are people who believe the earth is flat. Why is there no atheism for flat others? Why is it not bothering anybody? But the argument of religion is bothering somebody. And that's why we have atheist and secular association. Because number one is the issue of public policy. We don't have flat earth believers saying we should legislate or guide communities based on their belief that the earth is flat. But that is not the case with the religious community, whether they are Christian, whether they are Muslims. What we have seen, especially in this country, in this continent, and everywhere, is that religion has tried to reach out to influence not just life of its members, but people who are outside. And this is historical. This is not a recent phenomenon. It's been there over the years. It was a criminal. It was punishable by death to be an atheist. I think about 400 years ago. People like Darwin could not even write their book because they feared what would happen. So, and in the contemporary sense, we see religion in every sphere of life, especially in our legislations. If you look at, and what we want is, to summarize, number one is to argue whether the God exists or not. Number two, even if giving a benefit of doubt, you guys were to make a convincing argument that God exists, how should that claim affect people who have not got into the idea? People who are not Christian, because we have a society that we have to exist with divergent ideas. So that is why the question matters, because it affects the public sphere of everybody, whether they are Christians, whether they are Muslim, or whether they are out. You can see it even in our constitution, in our national anthem, in our schools, in everywhere.
Oh, so you are in the space because you feel like Christians are reaching out or influencing so much or something?
No, I don't mind Christian reaching out. I don't mind Muslim reaching out. What I want is, when it comes to public matters, I'm into public policy. I want any public legislation, any public discourse to be based on data and facts.
Okay.
I care about what is true. So I don't want someone like let's say like the argument that is there about sex education in schools. I don't want it to be based because Christians, they have their argument against why sex before marriage and contraception. Muslims have the argument. I want it to be based on what the doctors and the scientific communities are saying about sex education and contraceptive, not what the morality of the Bible or Christian or Muslim says. That's
why should we check the science?
Because if we care about the truth, that is science is the only reliable way that we have so far.
That's not true.
It's okay. We will come back to that. That's a very interesting perspective. Let me bring in the only lady on the bench.
Yeah. So first of all, if we are to talk about someone superior or something superior that never existed, but right now, you can't talk about someone or something that hasn't been there before. So we can't talk about if we didn't have like the word God, so meaning that the word God is already there. That is why we are going to talk about him. So if he never existed, we could have never been here talking about God himself. So I feel that from the beginning, he's already been there. That is why we are here talking about him. Yes.
Okay. A very interesting, Mark, there's a very interesting perspective that Maurice has brought. The idea that he wants the popular policy, popular, public stuff to be on facts and science and not to be seen as if any religion is trying to impose their ideologies in public space.
Interestingly, I would agree with Maurice, but I would also say that atheism should also not impose itself on public policy, so that all religions, whether Christian, whether atheism, whether agnosticism, let us all come. Because I agree, if we are going to make discussions on public policy, we have got to begin somewhere, isn't it? Because it is suboptimal for me as a Christian, but because it is for the public consumption, let everyone bring whatever they have on the table. But you will realize that there's a lot of sleight of hand, sleight of hand like in magic. So that the secularists will on one side say that let the religious guy not bring in their presuppositions. But then on the other hand, they want to bring in their secular presuppositions. So what we want is this, that let us agree that everyone is coming with presuppositions. As a Christian, I'm coming into this discussion as a Christian. As an atheist, you're coming into this discussion as an atheist, isn't it? And then ask the facts we have, for example, around us, where are they pointing us? And so that's why you find, for example, in discussions, say sex education and everything, the Christian is not just arguing that it is wrong because the Bible says so. He's also arguing that it is wrong for society. You get where we are going? So that the discussions are empirical in and of themselves without necessarily loading them with religious presuppositions. But I dare say that not even the atheists should be allowed to load their religious presuppositions, because they will quickly say ours is not a religion, but then it is based on presuppositions that they cannot prove. No. So if you're going to be an atheist and you want to say that atheism should guide public policy, first prove the atheism, which is something they have never done. They will quickly run, it is just a lack of belief. It is not what, but the truth is that's a psychological state of mind. It is not a position. So that's where I feel like public policy should go. Yeah, I don't know whether I can steal a minute here and comment about something he said about existence.
Please go ahead.
And I think it is also philosophically wrong, because philosophy does not consider material existence as the only kind of existence. So if you say that to say that God exists outside time is a logical fallacy, it does not in any way contradict any of the laws of logic. And so why should we assume that the material reality is all that there is? Now, that is an atheistic assumption, isn't it? So the atheist should tell us, why should we assume that only the material world exists? And I don't think they have any answer to that.
So maybe Morris has, so you will be surprised.
No, you see, and this is why I started with defining how we know things. I cannot make a claim that, I want to answer your last question.
Yes.
Whether materialism is all there is. As far as we can tell, materialism is all we can see. We are not saying
that it, us?
Human beings. We are not saying that there is no supernatural. But the question is, how do you know? Because the one who makes claim has to come with evidence. If I tell you, and let me go back to the default position. The default position is we don't know. If like we are seated here, nobody has been to planet Jupiter. If I tell you there is a couple dancing in Jupiter, it's a weird claim. Your position cannot be there. Your response cannot be there is no couple dancing in Jupiter.
But Jupiter saves there.
Yeah, but you cannot say that there is no couple. Your position will be you don't know. And then you ask me, what evidence do I have to support that claim? Yes. If I don't bring enough evidence, you go back to your research default setting, which is you don't know whether there is a dancing couple in Jupiter. So that is the position.
Can I ask you a question? Sorry. Do you think I can also say that there isn't?
That you'll also have to prove that.
Precisely.
Yeah, that's why I said God not existing and God existing are not default positions. The default position is we don't know.
So according to you, there is not enough evidence for the existence of God.
Exactly. The one who has made a claim about the existence of God has not accompanied with sufficient evidence to warrant a belief in that.
Jared, you want to go? Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, then I'll bring in.
But you also admit, in the same logic, that you have also not adduced sufficient evidence that God does not exist.
Yep.
So
because I don't have the burden to.
You don't have the burden of proof. Yeah. So therefore, even as an atheist, your position is such that you don't know whether God exists or not.
Yeah.
But so if we don't,
we are assuming the God of Christianity, yeah, right?
Actually, that was to be my second question. When you say God does not exist, as an atheist, are you referring to all the gods in the world, or only the God of the Bible?
So this is my position with regard to that question. I am an atheist of Abrahamic God, the God of Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. That one I can logically prove it does not exist.
It does not exist. But
there are other thousands of gods that I cannot, like if an Indian tell me my God is that cow, I cannot say that God doesn't exist. I cannot question whether he has the attribute that would warrant us calling it a God. So I'm agnostic to all other God, but an atheist to the Brahmanic.
Okay, that's very good.
Yeah.
You are an atheist to Abrahamic. So my question will be, before we even, I feel like we started this conversation in the middle.
Okay.
We should have started by defining terms. This person you say, you call God, in your understanding, and you claim he does not exist. Do you know who he is?
Yeah,
You see, like in this room, Linsa is here. If she walked out and somebody asked me, is Linsa in the room? I'll look around,
I say no.
say, no, she's not in, because I know her, and of course she's not here. Now that person, you are saying God does not exist. Do you know him
As defined in the Holy Text, yes.
as defined in the Bible?
In the Holy Text, yeah. In
So
Quran.
as defined in the Bible and the Quran, according to you, does not exist.
No, you see, fictional characters exist in real life. Like the Game of Thrones, for those who have watched, the Lannisters, they don't exist in real life, but we can even learn moral lessons from Game of Thrones. Doesn't mean that the whole episode is a reality. Or Harry Potter, those who have read the Lord of Voldemort. You can learn moral lessons from them. It doesn't mean they actually exist as depicted in those stories. So there's the God that I'm talking about is a character that has been presented in a book called the Bible, the Quran, those two basically, and the Torah. So I'm saying that character, as all the attributes given, cannot exist at least in a logical sense.
Okay. Let me bring Linsa. Linsa, here where we are.
I can hear that. So with arguments to God and existence, how can we explain that human mind came from matter?
I think actually he's better position. I've had him argue before, and he's better positioned to argue for me. That one, in terms of where you can, it's called a reduction to absurdity something. So you see, and that's why I will keep referring to my default position. The default position is we don't know. Let's assume we don't have evidence to that, like how consciousness arises and how our mind thinks. We should not then make a leap. We should say, we don't know how mind works, let's go and find out. Not, we don't know how mind works, therefore God. You get it? So we should not make that leap. But we actually know how the mind works. We know, that's why we have neurosurgeons. I'm not a neurosurgeon, so I'm not speaking from a scientific perspective. But we have an idea of how mind works. We know, that is why we're able to, we can even control people's mood. You can be injected with something and you're happy. Tomorrow you can be injected something, they can scan the brain and do all manner of things. Of course, we don't know it to the bits. But it's a scientific question. There are so many things we don't know. We don't know even like quantum and physics and stuff. They don't even make sense to me sometimes. But I cannot say I don't understand this thing, therefore it must be God. I have to go back to the default position that I don't know this thing, I don't understand them. Once we have the evidence, we will believe in them. For now, we remain in the
So is there still hope? Maybe let me come. There's still hope that more evidences will come.
Probably, because
some researcher.
But I can tell you one thing: it will not come from the religious community.
Okay.
It will come from.
Let me throw in something here. Now, number one, I don't know whether that's what he is saying, but I seem to hear the argument to lean more towards the idea that absence of evidence is really evidence of absence, which is not true. The fact that you don't have evidence for something does not mean that it is not there. Okay? And number two, you will realize that we have limited the idea of evidence here to be scientific evidence. And I think that is the second mistake. There are so many kinds of evidence. There is philosophical evidence, there is theological evidence, there is experiential evidence, there are so many circumstantial evidence in a court of law. There are so many lines of evidence that can be there that we are not limited to scientific evidence. In fact, the idea that scientific evidence is the best way of knowing is a logical fallacy. Let's begin there. It is a folly of thought. And anyone who proposes should tell us how they know. Because if scientific, and let me just explain, if scientific evidence is the only or the best way of knowing, all you need to do is give us scientific evidence for that statement. And there is none, because it is a philosophical statement, not a scientific statement. So if you can't give scientific evidence for your main premise, then you have destroyed your argument. So I think we need to be more, and this is when having these discussions, I always call for a bit more of kindness and people appreciating where we are coming from, that we shouldn't push that scientific evidence be the only delimiter for us knowing whether there is a God. And I think if we are to pursue evidence, there are a lot of evidences that God has provided to people for us to believe in him. So that instead of saying that there is no evidence, that we have not adduced any evidence, I think we need to be more open and more candid to ourselves and say, do these evidences actually work? And on the contrary, what is the atheist presenting to us?
No. Maybe, Jared, I want to bring you on board, and I want us to pick it from this perspective of, let's just settle at the point that we don't know.
Okay.
That is what Maurice is saying. And I really like you are demystifying, only basing our arguments on scientific evidence and giving us alternative. I think you are satisfied with the other. If not, we are coming back to you. But now this bit of let's settle at we don't know. What will you say about that?
That's not true. We know. We know God exists, but I wanted to, before I even come to that, we just add something on the issue of science as maybe as a guide to spiritual truth. Number one, science in itself, and I'm not belittling science, it's very good. People should research and go more into science. But science itself is ever changing. When I went to school, and maybe this you can use it to gauge my age. When I went to school, and in Form 1, in the chemistry class, we were told an atom is the smallest element,
Element of matter.
Element of matter. I was in Form 1. Before I left that same school, the same teachers came back and told us, okay, we are wrong. Actually, it's not an atom. Now, it has been a while since I was in a chemistry class. Who knows what other scientific truths, which were truths then, been changed. So when I wrote in my exam that an atom is the smallest element of matter, I got a tick. In Form 2 or Form 3, if I wrote the same thing, it will be wrong.
You got around.
That's the beauty of science. Yeah.
It's ever changing. So if you use it only as an ultimate guide to leading us to truth, it will not guide us because it's ever changing. And number two, the fact that you don't understand something, and or even there's no evidence for it, does not mean that that thing cannot be right or is not right. For instance, we have our mobile phones. You take your mobile phone, you type in a message, and somehow you press some key, and that message comes out of your phone, goes through the clouds or the trees, doesn't get stuck in somewhere. It goes to Huisero and gets into my mom's phone. I don't know, and I'm sure you don't know how that works, but you cannot doubt that that thing is true. Or M-Pesa, you give some things here, and you believe I've showed you a message that I've sent you money. No notes have moved from my phone to you, and you cannot explain how it worked. Maybe for M-Pesa, it costs just a message. So science is good, but it cannot be the ultimate guide to revealing to us the truth of God. Now, and then finally, we just still on this. You claim that you do not agree with the existence of the Abrahamic gods, or the God present in the Bible and the Quran. Well, I'm not a Muslim, and the Muslims are not here to speak for themselves. But you don't agree with the God present in the Bible, or the God of Abraham, right? But I'm sure you believe in that, in Abraham.
As a person?
As a person, that he lived.
No, I don't think so.
You don't even think Abraham lived?
There are characters I think live. People like Jesus, I would give it. People like Paul. But I think Old Testament characters, there's no way Moses could have lived and wrote a book, and in that book write about his death.
Yeah. Okay, so but we were saying, there are some characters in the Old Testament, because Jesus himself is also an Old Testament character. He's not a New Testament character. The New Testament writes about Jesus who has already happened. They did not write about Jesus while he was still alive. The Bible authors, so technically, where the New Testament begins, it's post-Jesus. So if you are to classify Jesus, we'll put him in the Old Testament.
As a prophecy, there was a prophecy about his.
Oh, there are lots of numerous prophecies about the coming of Jesus. But Jesus himself, technically, is an Old Testament prophet. Do you believe in him?
No, I don't believe in him. As a person, I think there's more evidence. Actually, most atheists think he doesn't exist, but I think there's more contemporary evidence for
That-
it. Not as a, of course, not the supernatural aspect of him, but I think there was a Jewish rabbi
Called
at that
Jesus.
time that people attribute to that.
Do you think, and you also think there was a Jewish rabbi called, or a Jewish leader or prophet called Abraham?
No, I think that one did not exist. I think that one.
Not even Moses.
No, Moses is, we are sure he did not. Yeah. Paul, we are sure he did, because we have extra biblical evidence that he actually exists.
Okay.
So Moses exists.
Moses doesn't exist. I'm
Doesn't
saying
exist,
most
okay.
most New Testament characters actually exist because there is extra biblical evidence.
Very
Okay.
good. So, and then I'll give others a chance. Just one more quick statement. So the Old Testament characters, you as an atheist, did any one of them exist?
With that one, I would say, of course, because you see, stories are told are based on reality. Like if I write today, probably a political story, I will include Ruto, Raila here. So definitely the people who wrote those, most of the character, they were based, probably the character they had known, or people who are like heroes in those stories. So I wouldn't hedge much more on the fact that they did not exist. I would probably dispute their supernatural claim about them, but I wouldn't make a claim either way whether they exist or not.
So according to you, you don't know whether the Old Testament characters existed or not.
Yeah, I'm agnostic. But the supernatural
That's still
character
okay. That's still
aspect,
okay.
no.
That's still okay. What about the New Testament characters?
Paul existed. Paul, we have stories. Jesus also from people like Scotus
Josephus.
and Josephus.
Josephus.
So yeah, that one you can say he existed
Okay.
as a person, as a human being.
What about somebody called Zacchaeus?
The one who was
Tax collector. Yeah, I know
That's
it
very
was-
Political.
But did he exist?
I don't know. I wouldn't. I don't have evidence for existence of him. I don't know.
So actually, when I look at your position, almost everything you don't know.
Yeah, but that should be the default position, because otherwise you risk knowing things that you don't know.
and actually, that is what I wanted us to discuss.
Okay.
At that point of we don't know. You know, what's our response? What's your response on? Let's settle at we do not know. Lindsay, you want to come in, and then I bring in Mark.
Yeah. Oh. So still on the existence of God, you've said that there are characters in the Bible like Paul, and there's another question that I'd like to throw at you. Like, if you believe that there was Paul, and Paul was talking about God, so are you still convinced that for real, whoever Paul was talking about did not exist, or those were also stories that were made from the Bible?
Leave alone Paul. I have you guys here. You're talking.
And you don't believe us.
No, see, I'm referring to this because you talked about Paul. Actually, you're the one who brought Paul up.
Yeah.
Then I'm like, well,
Even
so
though you know
if
Paul.
you know Paul,
No,
meaning that you know Paul, this is someone you know. That's why you talked about him. You can't talk about someone you don't know.
No, I know the Bible. I was on my way to be a pastor like you, so I was headed to Harvard Bible College.
At that time, did you know God, or did you think God existed?
I believed in God. I was brought up as a Christian.
So at that point, you knew God existed.
No, I did not. I believed God existed. You see, and this is actually a very important question that we also need to. Most people, do they think through to become a Christian? Because you see, like for you to join, let's say, a political party like ODM, you are going to look at the manifesto. You agree with this, you like this one I don't like it, then you choose it. Do you think people make that conscious choice? Like, I am not a Christian now, let me now choose to be a Christian. I think most people, because by the virtue of they are brought up in a Christian setup, or even Muslim in a Muslim
That's a
setup.
very good question. I would want the theologians here to answer it, so that you don't answer for them. Do you think
Do you think?
that people make conscious decisions
Or it's by default because your parents take you to Sunday
Yes.
school, they take you to Nini. You didn't even have a time to consider Islam or Hinduism. By default,
You are convincing her.
Let me.
Yes, and then I'll bring in the
Okay,
man.
okay.
Yeah, so for me, there's that part called morality. And that morality, even let's say when you're 2 years old and you'll go trying to get sugar, maybe from the sugar dish, then your mom will tell you, no, don't do that. Then you automatically would go back, check if she's there, go back, get the sugar, take it, go hide. So I think there's something inborn. It tells us like, this is wrong, this is good. So there's morality. And in morality, I can say that through the existence, I support that God exists. And that is why there's morality.
But that would be supporting existence of God of Islam as well, God of Hinduism, because they are considered their moral givers. It wouldn't specifically tell you that's a Christian God, right?
Very good. Actually, we'll get to that argument on morality and how that is going to play around here. So Mark.
Yes, I was going to answer on the question of skepticism.
Yes.
The idea that we don't know.
Yes.
And again, this is partly where I want to agree with Maurice, that it is fair to, in many things, and as human beings, there are many things we don't know, isn't it? Yeah, there are many things we come to learn. But then we have to be careful. We don't go into what is called hyperskepticism. And this is the idea where you reject everything purely because you think you don't know anything. You know?
What would be the alternative to that?
So I think, and this is where the Bible even invites us, God even invites us to come and reason with him, isn't it?
Exactly.
That there's a healthy kind of skepticism where you're coming with an open mind to say, okay, maybe I am not quite sure on this thing, okay? But given experiences or evidence or things that happen, that I can actually come to believe. Now, I want to throw in a spanner here and say that God has not left us at the mercy of evidence for us to believe. You know that? In fact, it would be a very difficult and hard thing. Imagine if what you needed to do for you to believe is be born, do your studies, you study, you become a theology professor. When you are 75 years is when you realize, kumbe there is a God. Then you believe. You see what I mean? God has not left us at the mercy of evidence. But people tend to belittle these other kinds of experiences because they don't think they are very good evidences. But these kinds of beliefs are called properly basic. Let me give you an example. Say you have a headache. Here we are seated in this panel. What evidence would you give us that you have a headache?
Only his experience.
It is your experience, isn't it? Now, that is called a properly basic belief. Even if you have no evidence that you can show us, even if we put you on and it has happened. I have had a relative has gone to these scanners. They are scanned, their head is still aching. They are saying my head is aching. The scanner shows no unusual brain activity or anything. The science cannot show us, but that does not mean that they don't have a headache. Yeah. And I want to argue that faith in God could also be a properly basic belief. Especially, and as Christians we know, for one who has experienced, for example, the Holy Spirit, that is a properly basic belief. You know, you have experienced him. You might not even have the evidence to show people that this is what happened, but you know. And deep within your heart, you have that experience. And that's how even men in the Bible knew God. He was a dynamic will that interacted with their wills, you know. That when David says that I have seen God or I have experienced God, he might not show you in a test tube that this is what happened, but he had an experience of God. And I think in as much as evidences are good, we should not belittle the value of experience in coming to know. Wow. And so I do not think that the Christian is wrong in saying that I have experienced God and I know him. The issue will come when we are in such a table, when there is somebody who is of differing view. How can we show them that also our experience is grounded on reality? And this is where evidences can come in. And so evidences have value, and I think the Christian faith has a lot of evidences, but we are not left at the mercy of evidence. We have an experience of God, and no one can belittle that experience. whichever way you try to look at it.
Wow.
Yes.
Boris, I think that is convincing. I was actually
No,
trying to get one to pray.
You see,
Pray for you.
Yeah.
You see, that's a very good argument. Huh? Because you see, and this is something I want to demystify what he was saying about scientific evidence. There's this notion that this scientific evidence is this peer-reviewed in a journal, whatever. No, every evidence doesn't have to rise to that level. There's these simple things we call experience, as he's saying. So to give the case of his case of a headache, of course, when you're having a headache, you know you have a headache. The problem comes when it's convincing others. So the question is, you have the evidence. Should I be expected to believe your claim based on your evidence when I don't have that experience myself? Because, and this comes up to the biblical story of like Paul, my favorite character. Paul had a Damascus experience, and they say he saw God or somehow experienced God. Who should believe God? Assuming that is factual, who should believe God based on that evidence? It's Paul. Me, I don't have that Damascus experience. I've not had God or seen God or experienced God in any of what we call common sense, our five senses. I've not touched, I've not seen, I've not smelled God. So the person who has the evidence should believe. The one who doesn't have cannot be blamed for not believing. The problem is with the doctrinal Christian, the way it is set up is, I would be punished, quote unquote punished, in afterlife for not believing based on Paul's evidence. Well, I don't have that evidence myself. You get it? It has not been provided to me. The other thing I wanted to, on scientific, science does not give us the truth. Science is, it gives us the best explanation as at that moment.
Okay.
That is, it's not like a truth that, they will say, you say the atom is the smallest matter. Now they have come up with quark. Now they have something else called, I think, trinon, something semi-quark. Of course,
you don't know what else will come up.
yeah, it keeps changing.
Yeah.
It is a process. It's not a destination. It's a process of trying to find out the best explanation that we have as at now.
The best human explanation.
Yeah. And finally, I wanted to correct something that he said earlier before, that atheism is a religion. Atheism is a response to one question. Atheism is not even a morality system. It's like if I ask you, what's your tribe? You tell me you are Luo. It does not tell me whether you're a good person. It does not tell you your favorite food. It does not tell me anything else about you. That's the same case with atheism. Do you believe in God? No. It does not tell you whether I'm a good person. It does not tell you whether I believe in science. It does not tell you anything other than that I believe there is not enough evidence for God. So atheism is a response to that one question. It's not a religion or a cult or anything. Yeah.
All right.
But you seem to hinge your argument on experiential evidence. Like you go to your favorite guy, Paul, that he experienced Jesus on the way to Damascus. Yeah. So now, but the evidence that God has given us about his existence is not just experiential.
Yeah.
Is a way beyond experience. Like for instance, creation. Christians or theistic, those who believe in the God of the Bible, we know God created the heavens and the earth, which is actually another way of saying that God created everything. We also know that God created human beings and everything, animals and everything that there is in it. Now,
I like it that you started by calling it creation so that you started by calling it creation so that now you just find there is a creator, but anyway, continue.
Okay, maybe I know that guys would think
begging the question.
Somehow it just arose, but and that's what I'm saying. As biblical believing Christians or Bible believing Christians, we believe God created the heavens and the earth. We believe and everything in it.
Sure.
So that's not just experiential. What is evidence, but rather tangible. What you can see, you might doubt the existence of God, but you cannot doubt the existence of the earth, of the trees, of everything in it. You cannot even doubt your own existence because you are there. So we have that, what the theologians refer to as general revelation of God. But we also now, when we quote the Bible, when we refer to the Bible, we are now alluding to what theologians would call special revelation, where God himself, like when Jesus met Paul on the way to Damascus, Paul did not read about Jesus anywhere. They met him face to face. When God parted the Red Sea, it was not about something that just Moses read somewhere, he saw it. When he was told to strike a stone and water came out, it was something that people were seeing. When Jesus walked on water, it was things that people were seeing. Now, I don't want to go very much in the Old Testament because you said you don't think the characters of the Old Testament existed. Yet, in your opening remarks, you had said that the God of Abraham, Isaac and Jacob, that's the God you don't like.
Yeah, that's what he's named. That's what he's named. Like there's a character called the Lannistite Game of Thrones. That's what we call him, but it's not a real character.
So I'm saying the God of those people in the Old Testament, you don't like him.
No,
you don't agree.
You see, I might not like you, but I cannot deny your existence.
Okay.
You know, liking you or not liking you has no bearing on whether you actually exist.
No.
So, of course, there are things I don't like in the Old Testament, but that has no bearing on whether there is an actual claim for God. There could be a God who exists and is not moral to my expectation. So that is, so the fact that I prove, I might say I don't like him doesn't mean him. But there's one question I also wanted to respond to her when she talks about morality in the heart. Do you think it's possible to also have that in the wrong, to get it wrong when you use like your own conscience, the way you say morality is implanted? Like in America, for 400 years, people are owning slaves. Those people had a clear conscience because owning slave then was just like keeping a cow nowadays, the way you have a cow to get milk. They had a clear conscience. That's why they actually fought for the battle with Abraham Lincoln to keep the slave. They thought they were doing the right thing. So do you think they had a bad conscience, or do you think they did it? Why did that conscience not betray them for 400 plus years? So if you use that, probably you can also get it. It shows that if you use that inner feeling, or what you would call your self-conscious, it can lead you to good things. It can also lead you to bad things. So it tells you it's not a reliable way to morality.
No, it is reliable because those people that kept slaves, they knew what they were doing was wrong. Because eventually it did not take people from outside America to come and tell them that this was wrong. They decided what you are doing is wrong, it must change.
But you see, and this is an argument, people who kept slaves and people who opposed slaves, actually both of them used the Bible to make their case. People like Martin Luther, they used the Bible to fight slavery and oppression. People who are keeping the slave, they also use the Bible to justify that we are allowed to keep slaves. They're using the Old Testament verses in Exodus. So you can use Bible to make either cases, which tells you it's not a reliable case to make a moral claim on slavery.
All right, let me make a rejoinder here, because you've raised the issue of slavery, and I hope we will not go into a wild goose chase of because we are here to discuss about God. There's a professor who's looked at the history of slavery and especially the psychology around slavery. Now, of course, you could have instances of people who owned slaves, but majority, who owned slaves and excused it, and they were okay with it. But one of the few things that he found out is, number one, that majority of slave owners who used the Bible to excuse their slave owning removed parts of the Bible and had what was called the Negro Bible.
The slave Bible.
Yes, so that Bible had parts that had been removed so that the slaves themselves could believe that the Bible wanted them to remain as slaves. Because it also turns out that those who came to know God through the Bible actually found a lot of liberation and redemption through the same Bible. So instead of actually being an argument against the Bible, what you are actually presenting is an argument for why the Bible is a better source, a better source for morality than not. More importantly, and I think I have mentioned to you this in the past, you probably didn't know it is me, that the ending of slave trade, especially in Europe, and really the ending of the transatlantic slave trade really ends with Europe, with these guys who are called Wilberforce
William
and the
Wilberforce.
likes,
Yeah.
it was predominantly because of their Christian worldview that they stopped slavery. In fact, if you read biographies of Wilberforce, you will find that he stood against the grain of most people in Europe, for example, and argued because of his convictions as a Christian that the Bible actually taught and was against slave trade. And so that a wholesome understanding of the Bible actually will lead you to a position where owning of slaves is wrong. But the problem is that people want to pick and choose scripture rather than understanding the whole scripture in its entirety. So you can see it was not atheism because they are atheists. In fact, most of them were against the destruction of the ending of slave trade. But it was actually Christian convictions that led to the ending of slave trade in Europe. And the same can be said about science and other things, so that you find that the Bible seems to stand tall against all who want to oppose it in the name of that it is amoral or it is immoral. So to be fair, I think we have to appreciate that while there are difficult texts in the Bible about slavery, a proper understanding of the whole of the biblical text leads you to a position where the Bible is actually anti-slavery.
But let me clarify that. I didn't say, I'm not arguing that you cannot use Bible to do good, like in this case, to fight slavery.
Okay.
You can perfectly look at the Bible, get proper verses that can lead you to hate slavery and fight against it. But my argument is you can also have verses that lead you to the opposite. So
and I think that is what
That's what I was saying.
It's been responding to, that there was an hermeneutical challenge.
Yes.
Where there are some verses. I just want to just clarifying so that you go on. Hermeneutical challenge in that some verses were removed to only leave the bit of slavery to convince the slaves that that was the way they're supposed to be.
Yeah, that's actually true. It's the slave Bible. I think I've seen some photo of it. It's in a museum, a big Lincoln Museum. So it's true. They removed the verses that talk of people are equal before God and those things, so that the slaves would not realize that. But that is that is true. That is a fact. And this is the point I'm repeating. You can use Bible to fight slavery. You can use Bible to fight a lot of crimes in the society. But you can, because you see now it's coming down to personal interpretation. Because if I can read a verse and go and justify to keep slave, then read another verse and justify why I should not keep slave, then it boils down to my conscience. Which verse do I, or how do I want to interpret it? So
I think
this
where I was disagreeing with that, sorry for cutting you
no
short.
problem.
And I think maybe this should be a challenge to those of us who are on this side. I want to agree with you, but remember that hermeneutics, for example, is not a subjective experience. The way you do biblical interpretation,
Hermeneutics is exactly what is what?
Is the science of the study
Interpreting.
of interpreting.
Bible scriptures,
Yeah.
But it's not a subjective.
Yes, it's not a subjective. It's the way you do literature. When you used to do say Merchant of Venice or Animal Farm, the rules of interpreting literature are not subjective. You don't go and you ask what is the context and you say, my experience was this. There's an actual context, isn't it? There's an actual idea that the writer is communicating. And so what you are talking about is true, that people have actually misused the Bible. All we are saying, and you will find this and ask the theologians, that there is a systematic way of interpreting biblical text so that you can come out with knowing what is the biblical position on this idea. So what is the biblical position on slavery? The theologians will tell you after doing hermeneutics, this is the position. If somebody decides to use it wrongly, of course you can do that for anything. But the question is, what does the Bible actually teach?